I am proud to announce the Biden-Harris administration will develop our nation's first national strategy to counter Islamophobia.
Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I want to talk to you about how suddenly the Biden administration, including Joe Biden, is singing a different tune. He's suddenly trying to look more balanced, more leaderly, since this war began between Israel and Hamas. Otherwise, he looked like one of the most rabid and supporter of Israel, no matter what Israel did. For years, Biden has been telling us that his support for Israel is ironclad. Now we know what that means. It means that if Israel kills even 3,000 children, Palestinian children, Biden's support for Israel will not waver. They can kill as many children as they like. The violence has reached genocidal proportions, and he's going to provide diplomatic cover, use America's veto to protect Israel from any international consequences for its actions. He will continue to provide military aid. He's seeking $14 billion additionally for Israel. He already has given $4 billion this year to Israel. So ironclad meant no matter what Israel does, no matter what kind of government it elects, this is the most extremist government Israel has ever elected in its history. Biden's support will not waver. It's nothing that Israel can do immorally or illegally that will waver his commitment. Sounds like religious fanaticism to me, that no matter what you do, I'm with you. This is Biden's position. Now suddenly he's singing a different tune. For those of you who have watched my conversation titled Biden Awakens from His Slumber, you should see that, where I talk about him suddenly waking up and realizing that, oh my God, there's such a thing as a two-state solution that I did nothing to advocate for in the last 3 years, or I haven't been talking about it for a while. So when he was talking in the press conference or remarks that he made when the Australian Prime Minister was visiting the White House last week, he mentioned 3 things which he had not done before. One, that we are not going back to status quo on October 6th. There has to be something else. There has to be a two-state solution. So why didn't we do that before Hamas attacked? And then he went on to acknowledge that his instincts tells him that Hamas's attacks are not, these horrible terrorist attacks have not come out of vacuum. He acknowledges that the expansion of the Abrahamic Accords triggered that attack. So his foreign policy, which was to throw aside the Palestinians under the bus and try and make peace between Israel and the Arabs at the expense of the Palestinian rights, etc., with no discussion of that, may have triggered Hamas's attack. This is the president's words. I'm not saying those. You can go back and look at his speech, or you can look at my conversation titled Biden Wakes Up from His Slumber, and you can see that speech. I included it in my conversation. And then the third thing that he said was he condemned the violence, the terrorist violence of the settlers in West Bank, which continues. And before you know, I think there is going to be a second front in this war. And the violence there is being triggered by settlers who, according to international law, are illegal. And the US, which keeps talking about rule of law, rule of law, rule of law, continues to protect these international legal norms violation by Israel for the last 20 years. So Mr. Biden now is singing a different tune, and that's very interesting, and I'll tell you why. So first he raises these 3 issues, and then after Muslim leaders in Minnesota and other parts of the country basically give an ultimatum saying that if you do not call for a ceasefire in Gaza, you're not getting a vote in November 2024, this man suddenly now wakes up to the reality. Just as he was sleeping to the realities of the Middle East, he's sleeping to the realities of domestic politics. His approval ratings are below 50. The support for Israel is below 50 in terms of giving arms to Israel. It's 48%, and that was before Israel started massacring children in Gaza and bombing hospitals and bombing refugee camps. Nobody's doing any service now and asking those questions. Should we still send more weapons and more money to Israel given what it has done in the last 3 weeks? I don't think any survey will dare ask this question. So Biden is saying that his policy, while there is support for Israel, definitely there's also huge support for Palestinian cause. In fact, the support for Palestinians is more than the support for Mr. Biden in this country at the moment. So he's saying that the polls are, the country is going in one direction and he's going in the opposite direction. Biden is America's past. The future is going to be very different unless we destroy Harvard and all top universities in this country to make Israel occupation more enduring and more, shall we say, sustainable. In order to make Israeli occupation more sustainable, we may destroy our Ivy League universities here that give America its prestige, its power, and its soft power, like Harvard and University of Pennsylvania. But this is the future of America, not Joe Biden. Look at the youth. Everybody below 35 does not, a huge majority of people below 35 do not agree with Biden's policy. So having seen this, this is the second thing. And the third thing is, so one, national polls. Number two, ultimatum from American Muslim leaders that they will not support him. And number three, the polls with Arab Americans. Those of you in India and other places who are watching, a majority of Arabs in North America are Christian Arabs, not Muslims. So I think about 40% or less of Arab Americans are Muslims. So there are lots of Arabs, very famous ones, like Ralph Nader, for example, is a very famous Arab. We also have Spence Abraham, who was Secretary of Energy, who was also an Arab. I think there are others, Jack Shaheen. So there are many other American prominent Arab Christians who are an influential community here, and their poll also sends this message. So now Mr. Biden then goes on and talks about those three things that I already mentioned, and then he calls for humanitarian pauses. Please stop for a little while so that we can bring in some aid to Gaza, we can let people go, and then you continue with the massacre in Gaza. Remember this, there is no problem with Israel going after Hamas, but dehumanizing them by saying that they use their own children as shields, really? The president went there. What do you think? The Palestinians are running around holding their children so that they can be hit by missiles? When I was teaching at a small college in Michigan, an Adrian College, the first year when I arrived there, there was a Palestinian student, a Palestinian American student with whom I used to play tennis. I knew him for less than a year. So not only did I play tennis, but he had a very nice car. He had a car better than mine. So every time, those were post 9/11 days, so I used to come to DC practically once or twice a week. So he would drive me to the airport, Detroit, and come back. And later on, he was killed. And then I got to meet his mother for the first time, and I remember that moment vividly. She was so crying. She was from Palestine, and she said, "We moved here so that my children would be safe from bullets." Professor Khan, bullets follow us wherever we go. So her son was killed in Michigan. Anyway, it just reminded me of that moment. But this violence against Palestinians is not justifiable under any legal principle. Absolutely not. These are civilians. That's the difference between a democracy and a terrorist group. A terrorist group like Hamas deliberately targeted civilians to create terror. But a democracy cannot do that. You cannot kill thousands and thousands of children and say, oh, these are casualties. As John Kirby was saying, bad things happen in war. This is the price of war. Listen to the way the Americans react to civilian casualties in Ukraine. They don't say these are price of war. This is price of expanding NATO. So in that sense, this discourse is one-sided, unbelievably inhumane, intolerant, and so incredibly cynical that you have pain for one child and no pain for thousands of other children. You care and weep for children of Israel, but you have absolutely No emotional response. Children of Palestine. What kind of leaders do we have? So this warning from Muslim leaders, which said that if you do not call for ceasefire, we're not going to vote for you, prompted this call for humanitarian pauses. But the US vetoed similar calls at the UN. Everybody in the world except the US is calling for a pause, a ceasefire to help people, children. This is absolutely unbelievable, the condition of Gaza. And the final thing is this survey that has come out from the Arab American poll, which is very important. And I want to briefly tell you what it says. In 2020, 59% of Arab Americans voted for Joe Biden. Now, only 17% after this war started, the survey is just 2 or 3 days old, says that only 17% are going to vote for Joe Biden. And let me tell you, in order to win the presidency, Joe Biden must win Michigan. He won Michigan by some 155,000 votes in 2020, and there are close to 300,000 Arab Americans. If he gets 0 votes from Arab Americans, he's going to lose Michigan. So with Arab American vote, American Muslim vote, the progressive Democratic vote, Rashida Tlaib's constituency is right there. People who are voting Rashida Tlaib to Congress are going to listen to her and not to Joe Biden. So progressive Democrats, young people, I think that's one thing that Arab Americans and Muslims must do mobilize young Americans to vote in 2024 elections. He could have worked with Israel to go after Hamas, but he's just standing there watching Israel go after Gaza. If you can't make the distinction between terrorists and children, I don't think you should be in responsible positions to make policy and distribute weapons. There are 3 states which are very critical for the elections coming in 2024, which are Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And Arab Americans and Muslim Americans play a significant role. In fact, I think both Pennsylvania and Michigan, the Arab and Muslim vote is more significant than the margin with which Biden voted. So if everybody votes as they voted in 2020, with only changes in Muslim American vote and Arab American vote, Biden is going to lose those 2 states. I also feel that there are other parts in the country where he might lose a lot of Democratic votes, especially young Democrats. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the national Islamophobia, countering Islamophobia national strategy that he's throwing as a sub. First of all, why is it only limited to the US? Why isn't the US committed to fighting Islamophobia globally? That's a question that I want to ask. A similar bill was passed by the House to combat Islamophobia, but it was not introduced even at the Senate level. Even though the Democrats were in majority in the Senate, they did not pass that Islamophobia bill. It was passed in the House. I think the US Democrat senators have to respond to that. We're talking a lot about rise of anti-Semitism, but this war is also creating a rise of Islamophobia in this country. The little boy Fayumi in Illinois was stabbed more than 20 times. The hate and violence against a child. I know there are some people out there who will say, oh, this is understandable because of what Hamas did. No, this child was living in Illinois. He had nothing to do with it. But he and his mother, both who are Palestinians, were attacked by their landlord. And that is because of the hate speech and dehumanization of Palestinians that our leaders are indulging in. Listen to Nikki Haley talk. Listen to Senator, this idiot from the Carolinas, Lindsey Graham talk. They're so desperate for money and votes that they think they can get away with such immoral discourse. It's stunning. I'm so disgusted with all our politicians, especially with their two-faced politics. Just contrast the way they talk about civilian casualties in Ukraine and the way they talk about civilian casualties in Gaza. See how they talk about rule of law with regards to Ukraine, with territorial expansion and with the rule of law with regards to settlements and the continuous diminishing of potential territory for the Palestinians. The same people talking about the same principles, talking about the same rules of law. So, yeah, it's a good thing that he called for a national strategy. Just producing a paper in several months, that's what they're going to do for the next few months. There's going to be an interagency committee that is going to get together and write a paper on a national strategy. Why not just take the national strategy against anti-Semitism and just do a word replace with Islam instead of Judaism? You have the same strategy. Do the 4 things that you want to do. Raise awareness about Islamophobia, like you're trying to raise awareness about anti-Semitism, celebrate the heritage of the Jewish communities, you celebrate the heritage of the Muslim community, go after people who indulge in discourses. Unless you want to have a watered down version of it, just replace that word, have the same policy. But I don't think this administration is serious about it because, one, Biden didn't announce it, Kamala Harris did.
I am proud to announce the Biden-Harris administration will develop our nation's first national strategy to counter Islamophobia. This strategy will be a comprehensive and detailed plan to protect Muslims and those perceived to be Muslim from hate, bigotry, and violence.
The moment Kamala Harris announced it, I realized, oh shit, they're not serious about it at all. Please forgive my French. Kamala Harris is the biggest failure of the Biden administration. The moment she became in charge of this, I know it's not coming out, it's not going to be well done, and they're not going to implement this. There's nothing that she has achieved in the last 3 years of the Biden administration. Please point out to me. She was in charge of the border. What did she do? So that's one thing. There are 2 flaws in the strategy. Why is it limited to the US borders? Because there is a whole office in the State Department which combats anti-Semitism overseas. In the same way, promote and encourage our countries with whom we had good relations to combat Islamophobia. To make it global instead of national, get it out of the hands of Kamala Harris and give it to somebody who's much more serious, like Jake Sullivan. It's a national security issue, isn't it? So why isn't it being handled by NSC? The fact that he's done this, these are all flops. I'm going to be writing regularly about his promise to talk about the 2-state solution that he made in his White House. I'm sure he's already forgotten about it. He thinks that, okay, I might not get 60% of the vote from Arabs and Muslims, but if he can get back to enough to win, that's all he wants. I'm very sorry about that. I have lost faith in Mr. President to be balanced, both domestically and internationally. This is the biggest failure of Joe Biden. He has convinced a vast number of Americans that he cannot be a balanced president both at home and abroad. He abandoned Afghanistan and he spent billions of dollars in Ukraine, and he's asking for $61 billion more. It's unbelievable. There's no limit to how much money he's willing to throw. This phrase often used by him and his lackeys are whatever it takes for however long it takes. By the way, I think they're not going to keep up that promise too. The United States is getting better and better at reneging on its promises. So anyway, you saw a very angry Muqtedar Khan in this conversation, but that's how I feel. I feel betrayed. I voted for Biden. And he's not acting as if he's my president. Yeah, and yes, he may think he's doing something great by presenting this national strategy to combat Islamophobia. The fact that he's given it to Kamala Harris tells me he's not serious about it. This is Muqtedar Khan. Thank you for watching Khanversations. Please subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, press the bell icon, share it with your friends and others. And until next time, take care.